Okay. It was. That's not what we're doing. Surprise. We're switching up the topics. You're now in Introduction to Calculus. No, I don't know what that is. Just whoever was in here before. I guess. Yeah. Just vibing. All right. Oh, microphone. Whoop. Okay. La da 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 da. All right. I think we can. Happy belated April Fools. Have you played some wonderful trick on me by booking all my afternoon appointments and not going to show up for any of them? That would be great. Okay. Not that ever happens. Okay, so I guess. Okay, so today we're getting close on end of content. I don't know exactly when we're going to end. Whether we hit the end of class content on Friday or Monday just depends how quickly we go through what's left. So either we're going to end right on time or we're going to end one class early. I'm not sure. We're just going to go with it. See how my voice holds out. I forgot my tea on my desk in my office, and I didn't have time to go back and get it. So we'll see how my voice holds out here. This was a question from last time, which I thought was an interesting one. So I will try to answer it. I mean, does digital addiction lead to other forms of addiction? There's going to be certain personality traits and kind of cognitive, let's say genetic and epigenetic traits that are going to make you more vulnerable to addiction in general. Certain things like anything where you have, heightened sensitivity to dopamine, a brain that's a little bit overactive, right? It gets bored easily. Something like ADHD is going to generally be more susceptible to all sorts of forms of addiction. That said, digital addiction is one that, again, we don't have an official DSM kind of code for it, but yeah, likely the more you're susceptible to it, the more you're going to be susceptible to other forms of addiction. And then there's going to be things that honestly go together, right? Like gaming addiction and sort of dependencies on pornography are things that tend to go together, especially in teen boys. But we will talk about that. Okay. So I guess we ended off, talking about sort of those four foundational harms that Haidt identified, right? So social deprivation, sleep deprivation, oh, right, this was the page where I wrote things. Attention fragmentation, squirrel, and addiction, right? So that's kind of where we left off. And for today, we're going to start kind of talking about girls particularly and why they are vulnerable, especially to social media. And then if we have time, we'll start talking about boys because they have their own patterns of vulnerability, which again, the tech industry manipulates both in different ways. Okay, so we talk about our harms, right? So with girls, right, we do have a pretty consistent relationship between time spent on social media and the likelihood of depression, right? More time spent on social media, the greater kind of the, clinically significant depression score. And that's what's shown on this chart from the book. So according to Haidt, it's roughly 3 times, those who spend a lot of time on social media, girls who spend a lot of time on social media are roughly 3 times as likely to report poor mental health scores. And this is, pretty well backed up by, our gold standard of testing, which are randomized control studies, right? So these are not just like, as opposed to say observational studies, randomized control studies are, in psychology especially, the kind of gold standard for seeing kind of correlational effects. And we see these pretty consistently, right? Lots of randomized control studies have shown this correlation between increased social media use, reducing social media use and improving mental health scores. And they've done all sorts of these over time, right? They've done, they did a study in the Netherlands where they asked, their experimental group to desist from using Facebook when Facebook was really at its peak, for I think it was 30 days. And the group that desisted in social media use saw their mental health scores improve, whereas the group that, continued, the control group that continued using social media as before, saw their mental health scores stay about the same. And then Haidt, Twenge, and Rausch, right? Zach Rausch was a grad student of Jonathan's, who's now got his PhD, and he's a collaborator with both of them, and works especially with Jonathan Haidt on Jonathan's Substack. The Substack's pretty cool. If you want just depressing story after depressing story, go look up his Substack. It's called After Babel. It's quite interesting. And he's done a lot of the kind of, actual data gathering and correlational analysis and meta-analysis. They looked at about a dozen studies that all point in the same direction, right? That decreasing social media use generally improves mental health. And yeah, early studies of when Facebook was being introduced on college campuses in the early 2000s speak to the same trend, right? They showed that when Facebook arrived on campuses, mental health tended to decline, again, especially amongst girls. Okay, so why? Well, in general, compared to boys, girls use social media more, right? They're more engaged with social media, especially visually oriented platforms, right? So you're really like, Snapchat, but especially Instagram, right? Instagram is the big one. I guess now the other one that's obviously huge is TikTok. That's the other visually oriented one. Okay, so what he says, they all use the same business model that was developed by Facebook. You maximize the time spent on the platform in order to maximize the extraction of data and the value of the user to advertisers, right? It's all about selling you stuff. And the more data they have, the more attuned they can be in how they sell that, right? So, I think I don't know if I told the story. My one friend, Paige, great person, but she uses Instagram a lot. Like she's not a teenager; she's a 40-year-old woman, but she will admit to using Instagram all the time. Right, it's her favorite, social media platform. Her favorite way of kind of diverting herself for a few minutes. And she has sort of admitted, and she said this specifically, that she thinks Instagram knows her better than her husband, right? Because Instagram will recommend things to her, products, services, that she's like, yeah, I really do want that, right? That is exactly the thing that I'm looking for right now. So those Instagram ads really hit home. Now, I can admit, I'm a 100%, because I'm a political junkie at heart, I'm a little bit of an overuser of Twitter X. I will not say that Twitter is particularly good at selling me things. It's a lot of drop share junk. But I think X doesn't really have its advertising game together all that well. But for Instagram, right, the more time you spend on these platforms, the better they know you. the more they know what you're going to be interested in, and therefore what they can advertise to you so that they can sell you something, right? And that is the ultimate value. Okay, the worst platform for poor mental health are Instagram and Snapchat. The only one that was positively rated is YouTube, right? Where people rate, who use a lot of YouTube have kind of positive mental health effects. So YouTube kind of stands out for whatever reason. By 2015, 1/7 of our girls were using social media 40 hours a week or more, right? So that's 1/7 of your girls who basically have what amounts to a full-time job on on something like Instagram or TikTok or Snapchat, right? So using a ton of social media. Now, again, there's a full 6/7 that use less than that, but girls are still very heavy users of social media. Okay. Now, one of the things, again, we're getting into the realm of social psychology. And I think Jonathan is a social psychologist kind of by trade. So, I mean, some of this stuff, is a little bit based in kind of that evolutionary kind of social theory that kind of goes together. So if that's not your bag, I know not everybody likes social psychology for some of these reasons, but I think there's something to this, right? So what Jonathan says is girls and boys, right, males and females are broadly similar when it comes to their psychology. But there are a couple of really key differences that show up pretty consistently across cultures and eras, right? And there's basically, he separates this into two goals, right? One, which is that all human beings have, but that show up in different ways for males and females, kind of in general. So those two goals are agency and communion, right? And they're found in nearly everyone, right? Other than, you might not find communion in sociopaths and psychopaths. And there's going to be some people that don't have much drive for agency, depending on some kind of mental disorders. But for most people, these are the two big kind of motivators, right? Two things that everybody wants. All right. So agency. What is agency? Basically, you want to show capabilities, right? It arises from striving to individuate and expand the self and involves qualities such as efficiency, competence, and assertiveness, right? We want to be able to be good at things, right? So agency is, ability, and you want to be good at things, right? Communion is essentially like connecting with people, right? Integrate the self into a larger social unit, caring for others, and involves qualities such as benevolence, cooperativeness, and empathy, right? This is, we want to connect with people, right? We want social connections. Now, again, both boys and girls will have both agency and communion, but from a kind of biological impetus, generally speaking, boys tend to focus more on agency and girls tend to focus more on communion. And again, we can kind of see this in some of the patterns, and we'll talk about this as we go forward, that we see in terms of problematic tech use. What are video games, right? Video games are basically agency machines, in a sense, right? When I don't know, let's take Fortnite, for example. Okay, actually, let's take a different game. Because it doesn't matter which game I take. We'll talk about Fortnite. Right, so when we talk about agency in something like that, right? You plop into the world of Fortnite, you jump off the battle bus, land on the island, and you're thrown into a battle royale with other people where you're, trying to shoot them in the face. And, as you play more, you're going to get better at it, right? Not me, I suck. But generally, certainly my 12-year-old, while he was allowed to play, got a lot better, and you gain skills, right? You get better at building the crazy constructions that you build in a game like that, right? and you improve at the game, right? So you actually, get experiences and you develop competencies, right? And this is very appealing, especially to boys, right? Again, it's not that it's not appealing to girls, but getting good at stuff, especially competitive things, really appeals to something deep in the kind of like biosocial kind of essence of boys. Girls, generally speaking, and again, there's lots of competitive girls too who love video games. I'm not saying there aren't, but they tend to focus a little bit more on communion, right? Connecting with people, integrating themselves into social units, kind of moving into social hierarchies, and kind of trying to, rank themselves up in those social hierarchies, right? But if we look at general orientations, women in general, much more focused on relationships, men much more focused on achievements, right? So which is why, if you ever look at kind of general patterns, men tend to like playing sports, right? Because there's just with their friends, it's an achievement that they can do together. They can show competencies, and efficiency and effectiveness, whereas women will tend to be a little bit more social in their interactions on the whole. So, all right, forward we go. So, what does this do to girls, right? So we're going to talk about, especially this communion aspect, because it's this kind of aspect of kind of human psychology that a lot of social media apps manipulate and affect in ways that often are kind of hard to appreciate. So we got 4 reasons girls are particularly vulnerable to social media. Girls are more affected by visual comparisons than men are, right? Again, men are going to be vulnerable to different things, but girls particularly affected by visual comparisons. So he quotes this song by Olivia Rodrigo, right? I want to throw my phone across the room because all I see is girls too good to be true. In a song apparently called Jealousy, Jealousy. I've never heard this song. I also have to ask my 15-year-old about this. She's a big Olivia Rodrigo fan. So what Haidt says is, taking from kind of social psychology research, humans are comparison machines, right? Mark Leary, who he quotes in the book, basically describes human beings as having a sociometer, right? So imagine you've got a kind of a scale or a gauge that runs from 0 to 100, right? Telling you where you stand in the local prestige rankings minute by minute. Meaning that at a very kind of basic psychological level, people are always comparing themselves to the other people around them, right? In all sorts of ways. Now, when that needle drops, your social status decreases, it will tend to trigger anxiety, right? Which motivates you to change your behavior and get the needle back up, right? And we know this, right? When we talk about things like bullying, right? One of the reasons that bullying, especially cyberbullying, is such a concern is because it's a sort of assault on your sociometer. If you're being constantly teased, it's kind of a constant hit to that sociometer. And what that's telling you is you're falling in the group ranking, right? You're less valuable in a particular group ranking. And the more you fall, the more anxious you get. Why? Because evolutionarily, if we're designed to sort of fit into the group, right? Human beings are sort of relentless conformity machines, right? We always want to think of ourselves as crazy individuals, but in a lot of cases, all we care about is sort of fitting into the group. Why? Because we're essentially tribal creatures, and the way we survived, historically was by being part of a group that could protect us, right? From bigger animals and bigger groups and all of that stuff. So we're super attuned, kind of on a biological level to our status in the group. And when we move down, right, it triggers a fear that we might get kind of excluded or kicked out of the group. And it is incredibly anxiety inducing. So what happens when you introduce social media is you kind of, crank this up to a level that is, it's kind of hard to actually understand how much it affects us, right? Because we're seeing so many things that we can compare ourselves to, and often things that we can't actually measure up to, right? So for whatever reason, girls' social status is much more closely tied to appearance than boys is, right? For girls, looking good is very, very important. Probably, again, a kind of co-evolution to the fact that men in general tend to value, physical appearance a lot more. So, on a kind of biological level, you want to be, as good looking as possible so that you rank high to your male peers. Just have to look forward one slide. Okay. Yes. Sorry, I wanted to make sure that was there. I couldn't remember. I will come back to this. But I was going to tell you something that's on my next slide, and I hate it when I do that because I do that all the time. But I couldn't remember if it was only in my head or if I had it on a slide. Okay. So when girls got Instagram and Snapchat on their phones, right? Around that time, around 2010, when the iPhone 4 and the Galaxy S came out, right? When they got Instagram and Snapchat on their phone, they started to be exposed to images, carefully edited ones, and highlight reels of their lives, right? So this is an example, right? Again, this is in the book. This is from an Instagrammer called Josephine Levin, and it shows the kind of process of, editing her photos to go from, this hideous monstrosity in the corner. No, I'm kidding. She looks fine, right? But I kid, right? This is not a bad picture or a bad looking person, but editing it, fake, using things like, Photoshop, Facetune, whatever kind of software people use, or filters, right, to make you look more like some kind of digital image of perfection, right, with the, the lips, great big lips and all of that stuff, right? So when you're exposed to this all the time, right, when this is what goes through your Instagram feed or your Snapchat, whatever. I've never used Snapchat. I think Snapchat is dumb. What you get is a kind of plunge in the sociometer, right? Because what you're comparing yourself to is these edited, perfected versions of reality, right? Or sometimes, people doing those amazing things, right? The highlight reels of their lives, right? Or what you see is not, people going through a hard time or cooking dinner and their house is a mess. You see them on vacation in Hawaii living their best life all the time. Okay. So it's like how in many video games today, some of the most popular modifications are cheat programs to fulfill that agency with greater ease. Yes, absolutely, right? Because you want to raise your social status by being good at something, right? And so if you're rocking that, if you're using aimbot or something like that, my son would always accuse everybody that killed him of using aimbot. It's like, that's aimbot. I'm like, okay. It's not just that you suck, it's that it's aimbot. And I say this, he could kill me every single time. Like, he's so much better at video games than I am. But yeah, it raises your agency, right? If you're winning all the time. Jealousy is one of Olivia's best songs. I'll have to listen to it. I have Spotify. I just listen to dumb stuff on it. Okay, so our visual comparisons. So there's always been social comparison, right? I'll put it this way. I went to with my daughter. I took her to A Midsummer Night's Dream, the 70s musical, right? So based on Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream. And the two female characters, Helena, and I can't remember the other one's name for the life of me at the moment. The one is like, I know she's prettier than me, right? I know she's more beautiful, she's more fair, but am I so awful that no one can love me, right? There's always been kind of social comparison, and especially for girls, based on beauty standards, right? It's always been there. It's at a very basic level. But social media seems to dial this up, right? It basically, I guess, think of it the same way we thought of, dating apps, right? Dating apps, what did dating apps do? Right? They increase the volume of available partners. And it's the same thing with social media apps that are visual, right? It increases the volume of comparisons, right? suddenly, instead of just comparing yourself to all of the people in this room, right? Or you're walking down the halls of your high school or junior high or university, and you're doing visual comparisons to all the people you see, now it's everybody that's in your feed, right? Possibly thousands or millions of people. And, with the advantage, that some of these images are of impossibly beautiful women and girls because they've been edited, right? They've been photoshopped, they've been face-tuned, just like this, right? To go from this horrifying gremlin creature. No, I'm kidding again. She looks fine, to something like this, right? I joke because I'm like, why does this need to happen? But I'm weird. So yeah, now girls are competing with these impossible images of beauty, and they find themselves lacking. And it's not always really even on a conscious level, right? Right? Sometimes it's very unconscious. I'll talk about that in 1 second, but I'll say for girls tend to suffer more from socially prescribed perfectionism, right? And you see this in kind of, bless you, personality indexes, right? In terms of perfectionism and things like, obsessive compulsive disorder, much higher prevalence in girls because there's a sort of perfectionism, right? For whatever reason, right? Again, it seems to be something deeply ingrained, both socially and biologically. Okay, so, and I'll say this because this is, I think, kind of cool, although a little scary. Much of this comparison, right, seems to operate at a subconscious level because they've done these experiments, right? So researchers in France exposed young women to images of either very thin women or average women. And those who saw, the very thin women became more anxious about their body and appearance, and those who saw average women less so. But what's interesting, they only flashed the images for 20 milliseconds, which is too fast for you to consciously perceive what's going on in the image, right? So the brain was perceiving something about these images at a level that was so quick that is actually subconscious, right? You're not aware of what you saw, but your brain knows, right? It was aware of what you were seeing. And what do we have on my chart here? Satisfied with yourself. And again, we've got our fun range of, when we get the smartphone being introduced, right? This is our great rewiring according to height. And we see, satisfaction with yourself for both boys and girls plunging, but really it started at a low point for girls and it plunged considerably there. So, okay, let's talk our other one. This is from the Atlantic. I like this. I like when people can be honest. Social media is not just making girls depressed, it's making us bitchy too. So, one of the other things when it comes to, harms for girls with social media is girls' aggression is more relational. So, we've often tended to think of girls as less aggressive than boys. And on the whole, that's kind of true. But girls can still be fairly aggressive. It's just that their aggression tends not to be physical. It tends to be relational, right? It is about attacking status, right? Boys will more attack, physically. It's physical. Girls attack status. So a lot of girls' aggression is meant to whoever they're attacking to lower that person's status, right? Which is why when we see female aggression, right, what we tend to see is things like gossip, right? Gossiping about people to ruin their reputation, turning their friends against them, damage their reputation. And I remember, I read an article a few years ago, and I used to lecture on part of it, but I took it out. It was called The Secret Language of Girls on Instagram. And it was things like, right, when you wanted to signal to someone that you had kind of broken, communion with them, you would untag them in Instagram photos, right? Or you would fail to tag them in Instagram photos that they were clearly in, right? To show okay, I'm mad at this person, there's something wrong with them, to decrease their status, right? Okay, so this is the kind of attacks that girls on the whole tend to go with, right? Gossip, attacking friendships, like trying to turn friends against them and damaging their reputation. And a girl who feels her status declining ends up being anxious, right? We see more instances of self-harm. What book is it in? It's not in this one. I think it is in iGen. There's a great quote in iGen, and I should go find it for next time and bring it in, where they're talking to an ER doctor from one of the big hospitals in New York, and she says, like, every weekend you have girls coming in here who've harmed themselves because of something that happened on social media, right? That people went after, one of their friends went after them on social media. Someone spread a rumor, posted a photo or something like that, right? And they, self-harm comes from that. Depression, suicide, right? Because, girls are more relational, right? They're more about communion. When that status, that social status that comes from that communion element is attacked, right? They respond normally, which is anxiety, which is, right? And what do? They become depressed, they self-harm, and potentially, if it gets bad enough, suicide. And interestingly, the movement to life on social media actually decreased bullying amongst boys. Why? Because bullying amongst boys was in person and, I can't spell. Physical, right? Boys would attack each other physically, right? That's what bullying was. It was like beat you up and take your lunch money. But it's increased bullying amongst girls, right? Because it's taken it online onto social media platforms. I used to have this scene. I think it's again in one of my other slideshows. It's from the show Cobra Kai. And the one character, Aisha, is describing how people make fake social media accounts, where they tell her to kill herself and that she's fat and ugly, right? And that's what it kind of looks like, right? It's cyberbullying, it's harassment, it's attacks on social status, attacks on how they look and all of these sorts of things. Now, cyberbullying is much more harmful than in-person bullying, right? Like if you're getting the crap beat out of you at school, that's one thing, right? You go home and you're safe, right? Your bullies aren't going to follow you. Well, they might follow you home, but once you're in your house, right, you're kind of in a safe space and there's a reprieve from bullying. Cyberbullying is much more pervasive, right? It follows you home. It follows, because and we talked about this, right? Everybody's taking their phones to bed. It follows you to bed. Sometimes it follows you into the bathroom, right? Because you bring your phone into the bathroom because being in there for 5 minutes is clearly too boring. So it follows you everywhere, right? It is completely pervasive. And so there's no escaping it, right? Cyberbullying is much more insidious. So this is a really problematic pattern, right? Because once someone is being cyberbullied, the psychological effects are really, really pervasive and cause a lot of anxiety. Much more so than like I'll put it this way. If you were being bullied at school in the past, right, maybe, that was bad, but you went off to your softball team that you played on and you were fine there. The people who played softball with you were great, or you went off to your, religious community and you had people who, talked to you and they weren't bullying you. So you're doing okay. Cyberbullying, right, when you're in all of those other spaces, it's still kind of present and it still gets you with those notifications, right? Okay. And it creates immense pressure for girls to monitor social media all the time and to monitor their every word and action, right? Because they don't want this kind of decline in their social status. Okay. I'll go back to my question slides. That happens sometimes. I like those coincidences. I bless your dog as well. All right. Do you think wearing makeup has a negative impact on social comparisons? I mean, obviously, I think makeup is, the reason women wear makeup in a lot of cases is to, move themselves up in that social comparison meter, right? Because they know they're being judged on appearance, right? Anything you can do to, say, cover up physical flaws, enhance features that are thought of as attractive, even if we don't really like consciously perceive it that way, right? It's all there. And yeah, it's comparable to like editing Instagram pictures, right? You're trying to increase how socially acceptable your appearance is, right? And nothing wrong with wearing makeup, but it's certainly not. I'll put it this way: you can't do this. There's no way. Makeup is not going to take you from here to here, right? So I think. You think so? Yeah, I guess like those tutorials, Dave. Oh yeah, I have seen some of those makeup tutorials. So maybe I'm wrong. I'd say for most people. I mean, I guess you're going to have to commit a lot of time to it, right? This is going to take you like, to go from this to this is going to take you like an hour of makeup, whereas it probably takes you like, you're like more like a professional makeup artist. Yeah. So it's probably not likely that you're going to make that big of a change. Maybe you can go from here to here, right? That's probably more likely. Ugh, no, I'm kidding. She looks fine. I don't get it. I'm not the person this appeals to. I'm just like, no, she looks fine. I actually kind of like the normal picture better, to be honest. Looks more like a human being than some freaky alien monstrosity with like perfect Botox skin. Okay. Oh, I have 11 minutes to talk about this. All right, well, we'll try. So, girls more easily share emotions and disorders. Okay, it's an interesting point. One of the things we can talk about when we talk about, oh, this is funny. I'm just going to tell you this. All right, emotional and mental disorders do tend to spread through social groups, right? So when we could talk about social contagions are real things. And the one that, really sticks out for me when we talk about social contagions is eating disorders, right? If one of your friends develops an eating disorder, anorexia or bulimia, you're much more likely to develop it, and it will kind of spread through social groups, right? And women, for whatever reason, spread emotions and mental disorders more than men do. And I love this. When a woman becomes depressed, according to Tierney and Baumeister, it increases the odds of depression in her close friends, male and female, by 142%. So a lot. When a man becomes depressed, it has no measurable effect on his friends, right? Bro's gonna bro, right? It's like, dude, you seem depressed. That sucks. Okay, let's drink more. Okay, no, I don't know. That's not how men talk. I don't know why I did that. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? No measurable effect, but when a woman becomes depressed, it's 142% increase in depression among close friends. So, girls' depression rates rose sharply about 2010. What happened in 2010? Again, that's our iPhone 4. My iPhone 4, according to someone's mother, right? I remember that comment. It's like, this is my iPhone 4, very specific. So, rose sharply. Social media, I think it's pretty clear, is leading to a sharp increase in sociogenic epidemics. There's actually a really long history of sociogenic epidemics, right? And they actually trace this back to like the Middle Ages, because there was something in the Middle Ages that was essentially called the dancing plague, right? Where people would, and people actually apparently died of this, where they would be taken by what they thought was like a spirit or something that would cause them to dance and dance and dance and never stop until they died, right? And this is actually something that happened primarily to women in the Middle Ages. They would just keep dancing and dancing and dancing until they dropped dead, right? Now, it used to spread face to face, right? This actually kind of spread in the Middle Ages from community to community as people went from one community to another, telling people like, oh my God, this person in my community got the dancing plague and she danced herself to death. Eventually, it moved to television. And a lot of things, especially kind of the eating disorder epidemics of the 80s and 90s seem to have been spread by television shows, particularly, after school specials that warned against the dangers of eating disorders, and programs like Jerry Springer and other like reality talk shows where people were brought on to talk about their eating disorder, and then people would see that and be like, oh my God, I have an eating disorder too, right? It's not obviously quite like that, but I'm being glib and fast for purposes. Now it seems to be spread principally through social, right? So through social media. Okay, and there's two processes. Emotional contagion, right? We pick up the emotions of those around us, and prestige bias, right? So what do we see on social media sometimes is people with kind of the most extreme symptoms gather, because they're being extreme and it's kind of interesting, and, online tends to skew to kind of extremes. The people with the most extreme symptoms gather the most likes and followers and become models for others, right? And there's this funny German Tourette's example. I mean, funny, kind of funny. Lots of youth were showing up with Tourette's-like syndrome, but Tourette's is actually a brain disorder, right? You can do brain scans and find the part of the brain that's actually responsible for Tourette's. But the German researchers wrote that they first reported they first report the first outbreak of a new mass sociogenic illness that contrasts to all previously reported episodes because it spread only on social media. Okay, so what was this? I'm going to say it's kind of funny, maybe not. So in Germany specifically, they had a bunch of people that developed the tic, and it was all the same tic, and it was all picked up via social media. They would randomly yell Heil Hitler, right? So, it's just like, it was acting like a tic, like it was out of their control. They really believed that they had this, that it was Tourette's that was causing them to yell Heil Hitler. My YouTube feed just got borked by me saying Heil Hitler like 5 times. I'm going to have to put in an appeal on that later, I'm sure. This happened last year too. It got blocked and I had to appeal it and be like, look, it's for academic purposes, friends. I have to get a real person to look at this. This happens occasionally. What was I saying? Right, so this was the actual sociogenic illness that spread, and it started with one influencer that was reporting this and would just kind of blurt this out randomly, and then other people, it got a ton of likes, and other people kind of picked it up, and it spread sociogenically, right? Because, we're like that. We have also seen things like dissociative identity disorder, which again is a real disorder, but it is an incredibly rare one, right? So this is multiple personality disorder. And for a while, and I don't know if it's still there, I remember it from a few years ago, there were people on social media that would go on, especially on TikTok, and talk about their system. I think it was their system, right? That is the term they use, and this is all the different I see smiling and nodding. This is all the multiple personalities that they were manifesting. However, most of the people who report this do not actually have dissociative identity disorder. Dissociative identity disorder has very specific triggers and causes. It's almost exclusively caused by trauma, and especially sexual trauma at a very young age. Most of the people who were reporting dissociative identity disorder did not have sexual trauma at a very young age. They had seen this on TikTok and picked it up and started to manifest symptoms of it, but it was almost entirely a sociogenic thing. So we're seeing more of this. We're seeing more variety of sociogenic illnesses spreading through social media. And why? Because social media is giving prestige to the people who have really extreme things that get a lot of interest and a lot of likes and a lot of views, puts those forwards, more people see it, and more of these things spread. Okay. 3 minutes. Okay. I can talk about this one pretty quickly, and maybe we'll come back and start on it next time. In many regions of the online world, adult men prey on teen and preteen girls. I was shocked because I was reading about this, and it's like 2 of the top predator platforms are Roblox, and for a while, apparently the site Club Penguin. You used to love Club Penguin. right? These were places where adult predators would go find kids, right? Be like, be my friend on Roblox or Club Penguin. Okay, so this is a quote from Nancy Jo Sales' book, American Girls. Really good book. It's just so easy for older predators to go online and just find a girl because, hang on, I need to highlight. I'm keeping an eye on the time. Girls want the most friends, right? They have that communion kind of bias built into them, right? They want the most friends and they want the most followers and likes. So if someone tries to friend them, they'll just friend them back right away without even knowing who they are. So if it's a serial killer, they still friend them back and maybe even start talking to them. It's scary, especially since a lot of girls will post pictures of themselves like in their bras or bathing suits, and the people they friend back, my pen, can see those pictures, right? So this was Nancy Jo Sales. She was writing about some of the pathologies with American girls and focused a lot on social media. It's a really, really good book. Again, right, they want that communion, they want social status from having a lot of friends and followers, and they're not especially discerning. Right. The other thing that Nancy Jo Sales talks about in the book is their male peers also prey on them by demanding nudes, which may open girls up to even more social risk. And in the book, Sales talks about the fact that junior high and high school boys will often demand or ask for nudes from their female peers, and then trade those images between each other like hockey cards almost, right? Or Pokemon cards, as a status thing, who has the best ones, right? So girls are super exposed to online predation, both from strangers and from their peers, right? And again, we're in a kind of cheap sex world where, for male attention, you're often sort of, which a lot of teen girls want, even though apparently teen boys are gross, it opens them up to a lot of risk, right? Of reputational risk, those images getting spread around, revenge porn, all of these sorts of things. And this type of sexual predation and exploitation is rampant on social media. You see it a lot. I'll close with this, right? We saw the case a couple of years ago in Edmonton of a teen girl who had made a connection with an American predator, and he came and picked her up here in Edmonton and smuggled her across the US border and assaulted her multiple times, right? So this stuff happens and it has real world consequences. And on that super happy note, we'll see you on Friday. We'll try to get through a little bit more of this. Okay.